Before I start this video, I think it's important to make something clear. I've never actually played a game of Warhammer 40k, nor do I pretend to have more than a limited understanding of the various factions or lore. I do own the Chaos Codex, and I even attempted to paint a couple of the models back in high school, but the board game and its extended universe have always felt prohibitively complicated to me. This is ironic because it's the complex lore that I find so fascinating. I bring this up because with Warhammer 40k you're either an enthusiast or you aren't. There's not much middle ground here. So for the sake of this review, I think it's worth knowing that I am not an enthusiast. And while I'm probably more into it than your average gamer, I can't speak for how authentic to the source material this game is. So yeah, 40k isn't exactly the most accessible thing to get into. That doesn't mean the Games Workshop or the 40k community hasn't tried to change this. There are loads of novels, comics, animations, fan projects, and YouTube channels that cover it in great detail. Then there are the games. There have been many attempts over the years to make 40k more accessible and attractive to the average gamer, with mixed results. I've played a handful of these, but not being much of a PC gamer and also not being an RTS fan has limited my experience with them. What I find really strange is I feel like 40k is the perfect fit for an epic, cinematic, action-centric adaptation that would bring in a larger audience. And while there are some cool short films and fan projects, although maybe not for much longer, this is an area that's oddly lacking in mainstream options. I guess the obvious reason is that it's too niche and too obscure to throw large sums of money at, but that's exactly what happened back in 2011. Relic Entertainment, most well known for their Dawn of War games, stepped outside of their comfort zone and took a giant chainsword swing at a 40k action game. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine is a proper AAA title that was released at the peak of the 7th generation. Relic's marketing manager at the time described it as the embodiment of some of the greatest action properties that we've ever seen in an interactive video game experience. I'm not exactly sure what that means. What I think he was trying to say is that this game is a big old stabby bang bang explosion filled piece of eye candy. It's now 10 years old and I thought it was high time I got around to playing it. So strap on your promethium fueled jump pack and grease up your Imperial chainsword because we're about to rip through the history, gameplay, design and the various options for playing it in 2021. When Warhammer 40k Space Marine was first announced at E3 2009, it was originally planned to be an action RPG. Relic's previous 40k games had either been tactical role-playing or real-time strategy games. Space Marine would be their first attempt at an action game in the Warhammer universe, and only their second game developed specifically for console. The development team cited Gears of War as an influence, even going as far to recruit former developers who'd worked on it. The team also consisted of members that had previously worked on God of War, and you can see its influence in the game too. After 4 years of development, the game launched on September 6, 2011, to mostly positive reviews. It didn't make a huge splash in North America, but in the UK it spent a couple of weeks in the top 10, appearing as high as number 2 behind Dead Island. It managed to ship over 1.2 million copies in its first year, which isn't a big number in the grand scheme of things, although this was slightly above what was predicted, and probably large enough for a sequel to be financially viable. Originally, it was intended to be the first part of a trilogy, and the unresolved ending is a clear indication they were planning to make more. The reason this never happened is complicated, but a key factor was the closure of Relic's publisher THQ in 2012. Sadly, Relic hasn't returned to the franchise since. I wouldn't say all hope is completely lost though. The website for the game has remained live since the game's launch, and with Sega now owning Relic along with the 40k license, you never know what might be possible in the future. So, you know how I said one of the things I love about 40k is the lore? Yeah, well, this game doesn't go into too much detail. It doesn't even explain what a Space Marine is. Even Space Hulk from 1995 does a better job at setting the scene. The basic premise is that orcs have seized control of a forge world, or factory planet, where a particularly powerful war machine is located and you have to go and stop them. Apparently it is based on a story from the 40k universe, but the way it's told through flat conversations between the stoic cast of characters isn't very exciting. It's not bad, it's just not the interactive movie the marketing made it out to be. It picks up towards the end, but it would have been awesome if they had dipped just a little deeper into the lore and provided some more backstory. The good news is that while it lacks a riveting story, it makes up for it with some of the best orc stomping in town. combat is addictive and has an immensely satisfying flow to it. It demands a mixture of shooting and melee, meaning you can't rely too heavily on either one. Ammo runs out quickly, and if you try to take on a large group with only your short-range weapon, you'll get overrun just as fast. The key is balancing a combination of both. You have a shield that can regenerate after a few seconds, but your life bar doesn't. You do have a couple of options for replenishing your life. The first is performing executions. You're not invincible during an execution though, which leaves you open. While some of these gruesome animations also act as an AoE dealing splash damage or even stunning nearby enemies, you generally don't want to perform them when there's loads of other enemies around, and oh boy does the game throw a lot of them at you. Using the Fury Gauge is your second option for regaining life. It provides a brief window to either perform more powerful melee attacks or enter a bullet time. You're constantly having to judge when to use your ranged weapons, when to go in for some hand-to-hand, and when the optimal time to unleash your fury is. The moveset is pretty simple, but juggling all of these systems efficiently takes practice, and when you get into a rhythm, this is when the combat really sings. It's not the most challenging game, but you can die quickly if you don't pay attention. That being said, this is a power fantasy, and it does a great job of making you feel like a manly tornado of destruction. The other thing that makes the combat so much fun is just how violent and gory everything is. Every gun makes a thunderous boom, and every axe, sword, and hammer makes enemies erupt into bloody chunks. Combo finishes slow down time so that you can see bodies ragdoll into the air in a crescendo of sparks. It's fucking glorious. At launch, there were several comparisons to Gears of War, but you only have to spend a few minutes with the combat to realise the similarities are only skin deep. If I had to draw a comparison with another game, I'd say it's closer to the early God of War titles. It doesn't have the same level of depth to the combat, but you have to prioritise enemies in a similar fashion, and the Fury Gauge feels like it was ripped straight out of God of War 2. I only have a couple of minor nitpicks. The first is that it's a bit lazy in some areas. I guess they were going for Warhammer Light with this title, but there are plenty of instances where the 40k license could have been used to better effect. The Fury Gauge, for example, isn't explained at all beyond how to use it. The purity seals that you collect that give you the Fury ability actually have an interesting explanation in the 40k universe. Instead, all you get is this. Also, the way collectibles have been hidden seems half-assed. The short dialogue they contain is usually interesting, but hunting for them is boring because they're never difficult to find or present any kind of challenge to collect. These minor issues don't hold it back in any significant way, they just seem like missed opportunities in an otherwise well-paced adventure. Now, this is the part where I wanted to talk about the amazing multiplayer. In 2021, unfortunately, on the PS3 at least, it doesn't exist. I don't know what the numbers are like on Xbox, but if they're anything like the Steam player count, it's not good. I'm sure if you were persistent enough, you could find people to play with, and if you have some friends, the multiplayer is still functional. The online community, though, is long gone. I don't think that's because it wasn't any good. Actually, based on my limited time with the PvE mode, I think it must have been awesome. This isn't some slapdash online feature designed to fulfill a marketing bullet point. It's a fully fledged suite of interesting game modes, maps, and an absurdly deep customization system. If you're a fan of 40k, there's so much content here, and it must have been a real blast while it was active. If you happen to still be playing it online and know of a way that people who want to party up can get in touch, please leave that information in the comments. My guess is that it died due to a number of reasons. Obviously, THQ's closure was a big part of it. On top of this, you only have to look at how it's structured to realise why the player base abandoned it. There are quite a few modes, but no playlist that cycles through them, so this would have fractured the player base. Then you add on DLC exclusive maps and modes, which would have fractured it further, and you have yourself one dead online community. You can still fire up a game of Exterminatus on your own, which is basically a co-op horde mode, and I gotta say, it's very solid. Playing this mode solo is fucking hard though, especially in the early levels when you have limited gear and perks. If you could find someone to play it with, I reckon it would be a lot of fun. You can tell that online was supposed to be a big component of this game, and like so many titles of this era, it's such a shame it no longer exists. Speaking of disappointments, I was really hoping to review the DLC for this game. Unfortunately, it appears that all of the DLC and the game itself were pulled from all non-North American PSN stores sometime in 2012. This was probably due to the change of ownership, although weirdly you can still get it on Xbox and PC. I guess the one saving grace is that all of the DLC is multiplayer centric, so even if you can get it, the likelihood you'll be able to play it is extremely minimal. If I'm honest, I don't think Space Marine is the prettiest game. Its level design has some epic backgrounds, but up close they're simple and barren. There's definitely some cool fan service if you pay attention, and most of the textures hold up okay on close inspection. Overall though, this is a very brown game. In the second half things do get a bit more interesting, but you can tell that Relic prioritised performance over prettiness during development. The character models fare much better, especially the Space Marines, which are covered in heaps of little details. I particularly like how your suit gets drenched in blood after a battle. Titus is beautifully animated too. The way he moves really conveys how heavy and powerful the Space Marines are. It's how I imagine Arnie would move if he was strapped into the power loader from Aliens. The lighting is also good. It's subtle but effective, and even if the levels are kind of basic, the lighting does a good job at creating atmosphere. Cutscenes are handled in real time, and while the character models don't hold up so well when zoomed in, there's a nice consistency between gameplay and cinematics. Sound design is all over the shop. During the action it's great, with explosions, gunfire and screaming orcs coming together nicely. The theatrical score is another high point, and it fits the action and the 40k universe perfectly. The voiceover mix during cutscenes on the other hand is pretty bad. Captain Titus in particular can be hard to hear at times. What's impossible to unhear is this.
Space Marine! Space Marine! Space Marine! I ain't finished with you yet, Space Marine!
Be prepared to hear this a lot. It's almost as if the writing team decided that a central part of the orc language requires it to be used at least once in every sentence. The last thing I'll ding it for is the UI design. For a game that was trying to be a cinematic experience, it sure has an obtrusive HUD. I don't understand why the health, fury gauge and weapon info needs to be spread across the screen like this when it could have been grouped together. It makes it a challenge to use in the thick of battle with explosions and body parts flying everywhere. It seems like the developers were aware of this issue too, because some weapons sound different when they run low on ammo, negating the need to look at the UI for an ammo count. It would have elevated the experience significantly if finding the rest of this info was just as intuitive. Space Marine, or
Space Marine!
may not be the belle of the ball when it comes to the presentation. Even still, it's a solid package when you put everything together, and it still has moments that will make you pause to take it all in. According to a Digital Foundry comparison on Eurogamer, the PS3 is the least sharp of the three versions, although not by much. The 360's resolution is 1200 by 720, where the PS3's is 1152 by 640, so it does look a little softer on Sony's machine, although this game has some seriously whack anti-aliasing. This means the difference between the two isn't huge, and neither are what you'd call sharp. Thankfully, the frame rate is as solid as a Space Marine's neck. If it does drop, it's by an imperceivable amount, and this is true regardless of how many orcs are on the screen. I did encounter a couple of loading hitches which lasted for a few seconds. This could totally just be my PS3 though, because I replaced the laser with a cheap AliExpress job a little while back. The only technical issues I found were that bad guys occasionally got stuck in the geometry, and there is some sporadic screen tearing. This tearing happens so infrequently though that I didn't actually notice it until I started editing gameplay for this video. Outside of these two issues, the game runs incredibly smoothly at 30 frames per second. On PC you have the option to play in 1080p and at 60 frames per second. It also has better quality shadows, filtering and all the usual graphical advantages over the console versions. It doesn't come with a DLC, which as I explained earlier isn't a huge deal, but it's easily the most expensive version. So the console options are still a good way to play it if you're on a budget, and there isn't a massive difference in visual quality. Warhammer 40k Space Marine is easily the most accessible 40k game to date. The trade-off is that to achieve that, it sacrificed a lot of what makes 40k 40k, and ironically it's a less interesting game for it. It's not the most impressive looking title of its era either, and the multiplayer is now a ghost town, so the replay value here is low. Despite all of this, it's still an incredibly entertaining game to play, and if you're looking for a quality title to add to your collection, this one comes with my seal of approval. If you enjoyed this video, a like is always appreciated, and of course, a dislike will let me know that I need to improve. If you're new around here, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when new videos go live, and if you want to support the channel, head on over to the Patreon page. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
Captain Titus, Squad Solinus reporting in. Manufactorum Narcis is secure.
Very good.
Your orders, Captain.
Contain the chaos threat here.
Understood. Thunderhawk ready for transport, Captain Titus.
I will need all your skill, pilot.